Ja, Gott zum Gruße, liebe Geschwister in Christus Jesus, eure Jasmin. Ich möchte euch heute mal was zeigen. Ein Part von mir und ein Part von einem Kanal, den ich verlinken werde. Ja, hier geht es immer noch darum, ich weiß, dass meine Geschwister in Christus Bescheid wissen, aber für diejenigen, die nicht Bescheid wissen und sich, ja, ich sag mal, den Lügen der Politiker weiter hingeben und ihren Experten. Ich zeige euch erstmal mein Video und dann schalten wir mal um auf das YouTube-Video. Bei dem YouTube-Video ist es wichtig, dass ihr euch jemanden daneben setzt, der sehr gut Englisch versteht oder ihr versteht es selber gut und ja, viel Spaß dabei, den man nicht haben kann, leider. Ja, ist denn das zu fassen? Seht ihr das? Ja, Klimawandel von Menschen gemacht. Ja, aber durch diejenigen, ja, die uns ja diese ganzen Sparmaßnahmen auferlegen wollen und die uns alles wegnehmen wollen. Und wir haben zugelassen, weil wir von allen guten Geistern verlassen worden sind. Ja, warum? Weil wir ihnen den Rücken gekehrt haben und dem Wahnsinn immer mehr die Türe und die Tore aufgemacht haben. Ja, deswegen wird dieses Land so regiert, wie es regiert wird. Und deswegen wisst ihr auch alle da draußen nicht, ja, dass es keinerlei Souveränität in Deutschland gibt und gab seit dem Ersten Weltkrieg, nicht seit dem Zweiten. Ja, und ihr könnt nur Souveränität, ja, durch unseren himmlischen Vater, Jehova Gott, bekommen. Durch Jesus Christus führt der Weg hin. Und ich rede hier nicht von Religion. Aber schaut euch das, ist denn das zu fassen? Ist denn das zu fassen? Wie frech. Und die Leute sehen das nicht mehr. Die denken, das wäre ein Naturphänomen oder ja, der schon fortgeschrittene Klimawandel. Ja, und man sieht hier ganz genau, was diese Windräder hier machen jetzt. Ja? Ich wollte nur mal einen zarten Hinweis drauf geben. Ja, hier wird das dann schön verteilt und dann sieht man die Chemtrail-Wolken. Ja, wenn man drunter ist, dann sieht man so Bahnen. Sieht aus wie Kegelbahnen. Ja? Ja, also liebe Grüße, ja, an diese falschen Umweltschützer. Ja, wenn ihr wirklich darauf bedacht wärt, ja, dass das Ganze wieder besser wird drumherum, dann würdet ihr dafür sorgen, dass mehr Wälder wachsen, dass mehr Frucht- und Nussgesträuche gesät werden, damit alle Menschen sich auch in der Not, unabhängig von anderen Ländern, die uns noch nie was Gutes gewünscht haben, ja, weil Politik so mal eben nun mal nicht funktioniert, ja, dass wir unabhängig wären und in der Not mit den Tieren sogar genügend und üppig hätten, weil all das bekommen wir von unserem himmlischen Vater. Aber wir wollen es nicht nutzen, wir wollen uns lieber auf Menschen verlassen, die im Okkulten so tief drinne stecken, ja, dass sie gar nicht mehr wissen, wann das angefangen hat. Ja, und dass das für die schon zur Realität geworden ist, wie man ja schon sehen kann. Aber schaut euch das an, was für eine Frechheit. Ja, was für eine Frechheit. Ja, macht's gut. Ja, hier habt ihr jetzt also schon mal einen Teil von mir gesehen. Sowas nehme ich fast jeden Tag wahr. Ja, ich bin sprachlos über so viel Blödheit, dass die Menschen nach wie vor sich irgendwo hinkleben oder ja, irgendwelche Sachen verlangen, ja, wie Geburtenkontrolle, Abtreibung bis zum 9. Monat. Ihr seid das letzte Sündenpack, was es überhaupt nur gibt. Ja, und das kommt von jemandem, ja, der selber böse gesündigt hat, aber sowas nie hingenommen hat. Und wenn es eine Sünde war, die sich negativ auf andere Menschen ausgewirkt hat, dann habe ich die Hände davon gelassen. Ja, also wie kann man solch eine Politik betreiben weltweit? Die sind sich doch alle einig, das muss euch doch klar sein, dass die alle lügen, ja, dass jedes Land angeblich also von den Großmächten auf dem Mond war. Ja, und dass mit dem Klimawandel und so weiter, dass das alles Verschwörungstheorien wären, ja, mit diesen Chemtrails, ja, und nicht nur diese Chemtrails in der Luft, ja, die gibt es auch zu Wasser. Ja, es gibt ja so genügend Schiffe, die im Prinzip das Gleiche tun, ja, auf dem Meer, ja, auf den großen Ozeanen, ja, und überall diese Habanlagen und diese fürchterlichen Funktürme. Ja, Leute, wenn ihr eure Freiheit wieder haben wollt, ja, dann müsst ihr den Politikern sagen, dass ihr das nicht mehr mitmacht. Und wenn die Politiker sagen, nee, das gibt's gar nicht, das ist alles eine Verschwörungstheorie, dann sagt den Politikern, passt mal auf, wir sind erwachsen, wir haben Augen im Kopf, ja, und wir sehen ja ganz genau, was diese Flugzeuge hier machen, ja. Und dass es dadurch natürlich heißer wird, ja, insgesamt, dass die Ernten kaputt gehen, etc., etc. Das wisst ihr ganz genau und das kann man auch sagen. Und man kann den Politikern sagen, wir machen das nicht mehr mit. So schwierig ist das eigentlich gar nicht. Die stehen ja überall rum mit ihren Standdingern, vor allem wenn es um die Kampagne geht, ja, dass sie wieder gewählt werden. Sagt den Leuten das, wir wollen euch alle nicht mehr. Aufgrund dessen, weil ihr uns in dem Punkt, nur in dem Punkt, ja, zerstören wollt. Ja, ihr macht uns fertig, ihr macht uns mit Aluminium, Barium und Strontium, vergiftet ihr unsere Umwelt, vergiftet ihr unsere Tiere, unsere Nahrung, ja, die draußen wächst, ja, das vor allem wie das aussieht, teilweise wie die Pflanzen aussehen. Leute, die können uns nur knechten, ja, wenn wir auf sie angewiesen sind in puncto Nahrung, in puncto Wasser. Und wer da nicht mitmacht, der hat Pech gehabt. Ja, der kriegt halt gar nichts. Erinnert euch daran, was in der Bibel steht, in der Offenbarung. Jetzt gehen wir mal weiter zum YouTube-Video. Ich hoffe, ich finde es gleich. Jetzt muss ich erst noch mal suchen gehen. Und hier haben wir es schon. Also das werde ich
verlinken.
In
modern times, we can trace weather modification back to James Pollard Espy, who published The Philosophy of Storms in 1841, wherein he explained how storms are driven by winds, vertical convection, and condensation. Scientists from all over began theorizing ways of controlling these factors to manipulate the weather. And by 1946, General Electric began using dry ice to seed clouds and create snow. The first scientifically controlled experiment of successful weather modification occurred in 1948, when Dr. Irving Langmuir was able to produce rain by artificially seeding clouds. During the Vietnam War, the U.S. Army used cloud seeding to extend the monsoon season in specific areas. This controversial use of weather modification as a weapon of war was classified, and when it was later revealed to the public, people were understandably concerned. In 1977,
Habt ihr das gerade gelesen? Ja, Wetter manipulieren, um Menschen zu töten. Ist das jetzt angekommen bei allen? Bitte leitet das weiter an diejenigen, die das nicht glauben wollen. Wir gehen mal weiter.
the Convention on the Prohibition of Hostile Use of Environmental Modification Techniques was signed in Geneva, with the hopes of preventing any nation from using weather modification as a means of war. By the end of the 20th century, dozens of countries were using cloud seeding and other techniques to successfully modify the weather. In 2008, Beijing's Institute of Artificial Influence on the Weather announced its intention of manipulating the weather to ensure optimum conditions for the Olympics. In 2010, Abu Dhabi was able to produce dozens of storms, creating rain, hail, wind gales, and lightning. As technology and weather modification advanced, it was not openly discussed in the public forum, and after decades of successful operations, was considered a conspiracy theory in pop culture.
I've read some theories that HARP can be used to manipulate the weather. Is this possible?
Yeah, HARP is, Mahili, what is it? High altitude
Radio pension.
I always forget the acronym.
Yeah.
There are people who are sure that the government is stockpiling aliens and controlling
Right.
everything about anything we would ever think about. And they clearly have never worked for the government because
Right.
the level of incompetence of the
Inefficiency.
government and inefficiency
Yeah.
knows no bounds.
Yeah. But
for starters.
It's true that you could manipulate the weather like they did during the Olympics in China. Like, it's not that you can't manipulate the weather, it's that whether you would really have any serious control.
Yeah, a lot of the weather, weather happens in many places. So it comes about from the heat balance, from the energy coming from the sun, what it reflects off of, what it gets absorbed by, what the upcurrents do, what the downdrafts do, what the rotation of the Earth is doing. All of this factors in. And so I have not been convinced by any of the reports to suggest that experiments in the upper atmosphere, physics experiments, are having any effect on our weather whatsoever.
Right.
And it would be tragic if we wanted to say, oh, that's why it's getting hotter in the world, okay? Because there's some experiment happening. That would be tragic because we would be missing the 900-pound gorilla in the room.
In 2008, articles were published on how scientists were learning how to steer hurricanes by injecting heat into the upper atmosphere. The High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, otherwise known as HAARP, jointly funded by the U.S. military and DARPA, is used to excite a limited area of the ionosphere using microwaves that produce high levels of heat.
Seht ihr diese Wellen da? Das habt ihr gerade an meinem Video gesehen. Ja, was ich euch gemacht habe, was ich aufgenommen habe. Ja, das sieht aus so wie kleine Bahnen. Ja, und ja, dadurch, wie gesagt, wird insgesamt alles aufgeheizt. Die Windräder und die Solaranlagen tun natürlich den Rest. Früher hatte man diese Solaranlagen nur in den Wüsten aufgestellt. Ja, warum? Ja, weil das ziemlich heiß ist, ja, in der Nähe von so einem riesig großen Solarpark. Ja, da kann man also seine Hände auch gar nicht mehr auflegen, ja, auf diese Spiegel. Ja, da würde man sofort kleben bleiben, das würde sofort hineinbrennen.
On October 27, 2012, Hurricane Sandy weakened to a tropical storm. Microwave imagery shows a thick red beam was then directed at Hurricane Sandy. Immediately following the red beam, Sandy is strengthened to a Category 1 hurricane and takes the mysterious left turn into New Jersey. In 2016, former director of the CIA John Brennan spoke of the real threat of weather modification technology.
Another example is the array of technologies, often referred to collectively as geoengineering, that potentially could help reverse the warming effects of global climate change. One that has gained my personal attention is stratospheric aerosol injection, or
Jetzt muss ich noch mal dazu sagen, dieser Typ da ist Jesuit, nur zur Info. Könnt ihr aber auch selber nachgoogeln, forschen. Ja, kommt von der römisch-katholischen Kirche, das ist ein Agent.
AI, a method of seeding the stratosphere with particles that can help reflect the sun's heat in much the same way that volcanic eruptions do. An SAI program could limit global temperature increases, reducing some risks associated with higher temperatures and providing the world economy additional time to transition from fossil fuels. This process is also relatively inexpensive. The National Research Council estimates that a fully deployed SAI program would cost about $10 billion yearly. As promising as it may be, moving forward on SAI would also raise a number of challenges for our government and for the international community. On the technical side, greenhouse gas emission reductions would still have to accompany SAI to address other climate change effects, such as ocean acidification, because SAI alone would not remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. On the geopolitical side, the technology's potential to alter weather patterns and benefit certain regions of the world at the expense of other regions could trigger sharp opposition by some nations.
In December of 2020, it is announced that China will be expanding its weather modification program, saying it will be able to cover half the country in artificial rain and snow in just 4 years from now. In a time-lapse video, this winter's polar vortex behaved as expected for nearly 2 months. Then, on January 20th, the same day as Joe Biden's inauguration, A swirling black hole can be seen punching through the storm above China, upsetting the polar vortex, and ultimately pushing it down to Texas. The power was shut off. Dozens were killed in their own beds, and the government blamed fossil fuel technologies.
The bottom line is, Texas thought it could go at it alone and built a system that ignored climate change. It was not what's called resilient. And now Texas is paying the price. I hope they learn the lesson. When we build power, when we build anything now, we have to take into account that climate change is real, or people will be caught the way the people in Texas were.
Now Bill Gates is warning that climate change, along with bio, are the next big threats. If they can convince you that weather control is a fantasy of conspiracy theorists, and if they can make it snow where and when they want, then it's checkmate for the globalists. Now we can see why they have made the global warming hoax their biggest agenda.
A chemical trail leaves a plume that stays in the sky for many hours, and chemtrails are rarely seen alone. What we most commonly see are X patterns, parallel rows, tic-tac-toe like grids in the sky, and of course airliners do not fly those kind of traffic patterns, particularly over rural areas where they're rarely seen. So chemical trails last a long time, and another giveaway is that if the sun is behind them, we often see a prismatic or rainbow effect in the sky through those chemical trails, indicating, scientists have told me, indicating the presence of chemicals in the air.
Stratospheric well-fact seeding for reduction of global warming. A process to reflect infrared energy back into space. And this patent called for chemicals to be sprayed into the greenhouse gas layer, wait for this, 22,000 feet and higher. What were they going to spray? Oxides of metal. Which oxide? Aluminum oxide. Now you're saying, well, that's a heck of a lot of airplanes flying a lot of missions to spray that kind of material. So we turned to the United States Air Force, and you know what I found? They happen to own over 800 tanker aircraft, KC-135 and KC-10 aircraft. Exactly the planes that we have positively identified in hundreds of photographs and miles of videotape as the aircraft spraying these chemtrails.
You mentioned earlier that you're a pilot.
Oh, yeah.
Talk about chemtrails. We hear a lot about that. What are those, and are they for real?
Well, when you look into that and ask questions, they say, oh yeah, contrails. No, contrails are behind a jet. If you see a jet flying very high, the condensed stripe behind it, that's normal. But in areas at first observed where there's very little population, you see a jet airplane going, it's not only one, they have 4 condensed stripes behind them. They go this way, this way, this way, this way, and then this way, this way, this way, this way. And when you inquire about it, ask people, you recognize that the real climate change scientists are truly ticked off, because apparently nobody really is asking them. It's the special interest, in my opinion, it's the oil industry, the energy industry, that are blowing smoke up somebody's you-know-what, and telling them that we have to lay a pattern up there to prevent sun energy from hitting Earth. And what they're doing in there, it's now pretty much determined. They're putting the aluminum, barium, and strontium. Now you take these chemicals and run them through a PubMed literature search in respect to human health. You will find more than 3,000 papers. Aluminum alone, aluminum Alzheimer's, right, mental, there's no question about it. Now it so happens, when there were people who really paid attention, if there was due to some weather and air changes, wind patterns, suddenly this stuff that they're laying out there, it comes down in rain. If it falls on crops, it kills the crops. It's like they have big blisters on any one of the crops, vegetables or things like this. Organic crops, totally destroyed, can't even use them.
All 3 of these elements, if ingested enough by the body, could lead to health problems. For example, ingestion of too much aluminum may potentially cause Alzheimer's, as well as respiratory failure. Barium can have similar effects like making you nausea or have a severe impact to your heart. And I can go on. The bottom line is that all three chemicals have some sort of major impact to our health if we ingest high levels of it, of course. And the thing is, every day, at least most of the time, they're spraying these things everywhere in the sky, exponentially, almost non-stop. And I think the point that I'm trying to get across is that how can we avoid all this ingestion of aluminum, barium, strontium from the sky, from these chemtrails, if they're spraying almost every day? And the thing is, all this lands on trees, the food, the oceans, the waters, the lakes, the plants, everywhere, even the insects.
About a third of the American food supply depends on bees. They help pollinate many crops, but the bee population is declining. This nature preserve in Chester County is trying to reverse that with a pollination garden to attract bees. But they'll face a new challenge as the U.S. Department of Agriculture suspends collecting data for its annual honeybee colonies report, an important tool for understanding the plummeting honeybee population.
What you would see is more desert than you would see healthy, vibrant landscapes. Their critical impact is on the food source.
Scientists say bee populations have been steadily declining for more than a decade because of parasites, pesticides, habitat loss, and climate change.
You know, it's pretty funny that mainstream scientists and media always tend to blame global warming or climate change for every disease or natural disaster out there that occurs on a daily basis. Yet they avoid anything else but CO2. For example, there's something called cirrus clouds. Cirrus clouds are induced by supposed persistent long contrails. These cirrus clouds trap heat, and in these cirrus clouds are soot and carbon black dust. In soot, there's aluminum, barium, and a whole bunch of elements in them that fall out and create these looking cirrus clouds.
Soot is filled with metals such as chromium, iron, molybdenum, sodium, calcium, aluminum, vanadium, barium, cobalt, copper, nickel, lead, magnesium, manganese, silicon, titanium, and zirconium. Considering that some fraction of soot can effectively act as an ice nucleating particle, and that a dominant fraction of ice residuals in cirrus clouds contain metal compounds, the presented findings support the assumption that aircraft engine emissions can act as ice nucleating particles, or cloud condensation nuclei, or just generically called a cloud seed.
If you're still in doubt that these trails in the skies aren't containing chemicals or particulates, I would recommend looking at the samples that I will present right now. Some of these samples contain high amounts of aluminum, barium, or even strontium, or even other elements just higher than their normal rate of level.
It is called geoengineering, fighting global warming by putting a chemical dust in the atmosphere and reflecting harmful radiation back into space.
You could use barium oxide, for example, which makes big fluffy clouds. But you could use tiny little bits of aluminum, which is benign in the environment, and essentially manage the climate.
And what I found was unusual spiking since the early 1990s in barium, aluminum.
But Rosalind Peterson of California Skywatch says health department records show a sharp increase in both chemicals in the water supply of Northern California, dating from the time the huge contrails first appeared over her home in Mendocino County.
What's the significance of the barium and the aluminum?
I went and got all the tests, and all these things in the same test would be up way over state and federal standards. It had to be airborne, because how could it get to such diverse regions of our county? We have jets going in every direction. X's, east, west, north, south, circles. There is something going on in the air. I don't know exactly what, but I think there's some experimentation.
I would also recommend listening to David Keefe's presentations, as he himself and many of his other geoengineer lobbyists have explored the possibility of using aluminum and other elements for geoengineering.
I'll tell you a little bit about some new work we've been doing, thinking about how you actually might put aerosols in the stratosphere. The novel method we've been thinking about, or it's not novel at all, it's actually exactly what happens from aircraft contrails, is that we put a condensable, a few megatons a year of sulfur would be enough to produce sort of 4 watts per square meter radiant forcing directly out of the back of an aircraft. There's a huge literature in the nanofabrication world about making fine particles from low vapor pressure gas, and there's nothing very hard in terms of aircraft engineering. If you go to aircraft engineers and we've done this, they say that would be easy, we could do this if you want us to. We've mostly thought about sulfur, and there's a lot of good reasons to think about sulfur, because sulfur is what nature does, at least in this version of the model, is if you put sulfur in continuously, you actually get a remarkably ineffective result. Nevertheless, there might be some good reasons to think about alumina. The big deal really is that alumina has 4 times the volumetric rate as sulfur, but roughly 16 times less the coagulation rate, so you could get away, we think, with much smaller mass flows. The little picture is from a nanofabrication study, which shows you can make high-quality alumina particles just by spraying aluminum vapor out, which oxidizes. So it certainly seems pretty cost-effective and easy to do this with aircraft that are not very different from conventional aircraft. High-class business jets like the Gulfstream have wing designs that are very efficient. So with slightly different engine choices, they can easily deliver large weights up to sort of 20 kilometers or a little higher. And you could do that by either building new versions of these aircraft or even re-engineering existing aircraft. We have engineering firms that can do it. So you go to an engineering firm and you want this done. They don't say this is hard or unusual. They say, okay, yes, we could do it.
I don't know if this is true or not, that some scientists are trying to figure out a way to block the sun to try to slow down global warming.
Yeah, it's a measure of the feeling of desperation that some of them feel.
Are they really thinking they could do that?
Well, some of them are seriously proposing, and I think it's completely nuts.
Yeah.
You put another kind of pollution, sulfur dioxide, up to orbit, cover the atmosphere. The sky won't be really blue in the way it is now anymore, but it would block out some of the sun's heat so that we wouldn't have to take the difficult steps to stop spewing all this global warming pollution into the atmosphere. And of course, there are a lot of problems with what they're proposing.
As for anyone who doubts that a global chemtrail program is occurring, I would encourage you to take a step back. Let's first go over the first excuse, the World War II bombers.
Countless disinformation sources are doing their best to try and cast doubt in the public's mind about the blatantly obvious climate engineering assault going on in skies around the globe. They tell us climate engineering is not happening. And what do they offer as proof for such a conclusion? They often refer to photos or film footage of World War II B-17 bombers leaving massive trails behind them during bombing runs, as if this somehow proves we should see the same massive trails behind modern, high-bypass, turbofan jet engines that are standard equipment on all military tankers.
Seht ihr das? Da hat er jetzt aufgehört zu sprühen und dann hat er wieder angefangen. Und das ist bei einem Contrail, also bei einem ganz normalen Kondensstreifen, nicht möglich. Ja, das hat auch nichts mit der Veränderung zu tun von der Flughöhe etc. Also, wenn ihr eure Jugend nicht mal wirklich jetzt mal die Wahrheit sagt, ja, und ihnen mal verbietet, ja, dass sie einfach nur auf die Straße gehen und sich den Idioten anhängen, sondern ihnen gebietet, dass sie nachforschen, bevor sie irgendetwas tun oder unterstützen, ja, dann sind wir alle verloren, weil so kontrolliert man Menschen, indem man ihnen sagt, ja, das Klima ist kaputt, wächst leider nichts mehr, und nur diejenigen, die auf uns hören und das machen, was wir sagen, ja, die kriegen dann was zu essen. Beziehungsweise die können dann auch heizen. Denk mal an den Social Credits. Ja, da geht es dann irgendwann los, dass sie unser Bargeld wegnehmen wollen und dass dann Konten erstellt werden, die bei einer Bank sind. Und wenn du, ich sag mal, nicht das unterstützt, was die Masse unterstützt und die Medien und die Politiker und ihre Experten sagen, dann kriegst du negative Votes. Also dann kannst du nicht Bus fahren, kannst du nicht Bahn fahren, du kannst nicht einkaufen gehen, Ende Gelände. Ja, und großartig, ich sag mal, selber anpflanzen, bei dem, was sie da draußen machen. Ja, wir sehen es doch selber, wie die Wälder aussehen. Ich habe das schon in meinen ganzen Videos gezeigt. Ja, das kommt alles von ihrer chemischen Scheiße, die sie da runterschmeißen. Ja, die schmeißen auch noch mehr runter, also nicht nur das, sondern sie schmeißen auch mutierte Samen runter, ja, über die Wälder, damit überall Efeu wächst und Schlinggewächse, damit im Prinzip der Nährboden und der Fruchtboden kaputt gemacht wird, sodass das Pilze sammeln, das Beeren sammeln dann irgendwann mal nur noch in den Märchenbüchern zu finden ist. Leute, ja, betet, dass die Menschen endlich aufwachen. Ich verlinke das Video nochmal, was ich hier gezeigt habe. Und dann könnt ihr euch das in Ruhe ganz anschauen. Bis dahin wünsche ich euch alles Liebe, alles Gute. Hoffentlich kommt unser Herr und unser himmlischer Vater in jedes Herz, was hier schlägt, auf Erden an. Bis dahin alles Liebe, Maranatha, eure Jasmin.